Billionaire's son, found hope through a dog's prosthetic leg. "Dad, please believe me." Ryan's cry echoed through the marble hall. His small body sprawled on the cold floor, wheelchair toppled beside him. His stepmother stood above, lips curled in triumph, calling him broken, worthless, a stain on the family name. And his father? He turned away, weary eyes demanding his son apologize for something he never did. In that instant, Ryan's world collapsed. Outside, thunder shook the night as he rolled into the storm, searching for an escape from a house that had become a prison. What would you have done in his place? Welcome to Emotional Echoes, a channel where emotions come alive, and every story leaves a lasting echo in your heart. Please subscribe to Emotional Echoes channel. Help us reach 1,000 subscribers so more souls can feel these stories. Stay with my video till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far this story spreads. Now, let me tell you what happened next. Ryan sat in his wheelchair, trying to steady the fork in his hand. He was hungry, only wanting to eat in silence, but his grip slipped and water spilled across the glossy table. Vanessa's voice cut sharp, calling him pathetic, saying he couldn't even hold a glass like a normal person. She yanked the plate from him, flung it to the floor, food scattering at his wheels. Her eyes stayed cold as she hissed that if he wanted dinner, he could make it himself because she was not his maid. Ryan bent forward quickly, fumbling to gather the mess, desperate to stop her rage. Before he could reach it, Vanessa shoved the wheelchair with sudden force. The chair tipped sideways, crashing against the floor, his ribs jolting with pain as his body hit the tile. His breath caught, and a raw cry tore from his throat. He asked why she hated him so much. Vanessa didn't hesitate. She told him it was because he was broken, because his mother was gone, and all that remained was a useless burden dragging everyone down. Her words stabbed deeper than any wound. Ryan's chest heaved as tears blurred his vision. In his mind, he saw his mother's smile, heard her voice calling him her brave boy, but Vanessa's cruelty burned that memory to ash. He wanted to scream, to fight, but only sobs came out. The front door opened. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hall. Edward walked in, shoulders sagging from a long day. His eyes caught the sight of Ryan sprawled on the floor. He froze for a second, a flicker of something shock, even guilt, flashed across his face. But before he could move, Vanessa clutched her chest, tears sliding easily down her cheeks. She said Ryan had screamed at her, had thrown food across the room. Ryan shouted hoarsely that it was a lie, that she had pushed him. Edward's jaw clenched, his eyes flickered between his son and his wife. He saw the smirk. Vanessa failed to hide. He saw the bruise beginning on Ryan's arm. But exhaustion pressed down on him like iron. He closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them with a long sigh. He told Ryan to apologize to Vanessa. The words hit harder than the fall. Ryan stared at his father in disbelief, his lips trembling. He whispered that Dad never believed him, never saw him. Edward looked away, unable to meet his son's eyes. That silence crushed Ryan more than Vanessa's shove ever could. The faint curve of Vanessa's mouth told him she had won. Ryan pulled himself back into the chair, his body shaking with rage and shame. The chandelier above glowed warm, but all he felt was cold. He wanted to beg his father to look at him, just once, but the words tangled in his throat. For the first time, he felt not like a son, not even like a boy, but like nothing at all. That night, his hands trembling, he stuffed a few things into his backpack. Outside, rain slashed against the windows. He wheeled himself into the storm, the chair sinking into mud and puddles, his clothes drenched, his arms burning with every push. He whispered to himself that he had to leave, that he could not live in a house where his pain meant nothing. The street swallowed him in darkness. Rain ran into his eyes, mixing with hot tears. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not in the body. They live in the heart, when the people you need most choose not to see you. And on that night, a broken boy disappeared into the storm, carrying nothing but the desperate hope that somewhere, someone might finally see him. Ryan pushed his chair through the soaked streets, rain plastering his hair against his forehead. Every turn of the wheels felt heavier, but anger kept him moving. He told himself he would rather drown in the storm than stay in that house where he was invisible. His arms burned, his throat raw, and he did not notice the group of boys lurking near the corner. They saw him struggling and burst out laughing. They called him Rich Cripple Boy, mocking his chair and the way his clothes clung to his body. Ryan tried to keep moving, eyes fixed ahead, but one of them shoved the chair hard. He tipped sideways, his body slamming against the wet pavement. Pain shot through his hip and his hands scraped against the ground. The laughter grew louder, each sound cutting deeper than the fall itself. Then a sharp voice rang out, cutting through the storm. It wasn't a passerby. It was Sarah, a woman who lived a few blocks away and often walked her dog at night, even in the rain. She walked with a steady limp, her coat soaked through, one hand gripping the leash of Max. The boys froze when the streetlight revealed what she carried on her own body, a gleaming metal prosthetic where her leg had once been. Max barked loudly, stepping forward on his titanium limb, the sound of metal tapping against the pavement. Sarah's voice cut cold, telling the boys to back off before she made sure they regretted it. They faltered, muttered curses under their breath, and slipped into the shadows. Ryan stayed on the ground, shivering, staring up at her. She knelt, her soaked hair clinging to her face, and reached out her hand. Her grip was firm as she pulled him back into his chair. But what stunned him most was not her strength. It was the leg of metal strapped to her body and the matching prosthetic on the dog beside her. Ryan's eyes locked on Max as the little dog shook water from his fur, tail wagging, hopping easily on 3 legs, and the metal fourth. The sight punched through Ryan's chest like lightning. He whispered bitterly that it was different for him, that people expected more. Sarah's gaze didn't waver. She nodded toward Max and said quietly that pain didn't choose favorites. She told him Max had lost his leg, but he still ran, still played, still loved life. Ryan wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that losing a leg had cost him everything, that he could never live that way. But Max darted forward, then circled back, paws splashing in the puddles, his little titanium leg gleaming under the streetlight. He moved with joy, not shame, every step an act of defiance against weakness. Ryan sat frozen, raindrops streaming down his face, unable to look away. In that moment, the contrast carved deep into him. He was a boy, drenched in despair, chained to his chair, hiding from the world. Yet here was a dog, broken in body but not in spirit, running free. His chest ached with shame and longing. And for the first time since the accident, something cracked inside him. It wasn't belief, not yet. But it was the faintest flicker of hope. Sarah guided Ryan into her small apartment, the wheels of his chair squeaking against the old floorboards. The place smelled faintly of coffee and books, worn but warm, nothing like the cold mansion he had left behind. Ryan muttered that she didn't need to bring him, that he was fine outside. She shot him a look, her voice flat. Fine is the word people use when they're drowning, but too proud to ask for help. He snapped back, bitter, saying she had no idea what it felt like to lose everything. His voice cracked, sharp with anger he could not contain. Sarah leaned against the counter, her wet coat dripping onto the floor. She spoke quietly, but her words cut deep. She said she had lost her leg to a drunk driver, her career as an athlete, and the man who once promised to love her. Then she asked him what excuse he had left. Ryan froze, her words hitting like stones. He wanted to argue, to tell her she couldn't compare her life to his, but the fire in her eyes silenced him. He turned away, muttering that she didn't know what it was like to have a father who looked right past him, as if he didn't exist. Sarah's tone softened, but didn't bend. She told him pain had no age, and it only mattered what they chose to do with it. That night, Ryan lay on the couch she had made for him, the blanket pulled to his chest. He stared at the ceiling, restless, his mind refusing to settle. He heard movement and turned his head. Sarah stood in the kitchen, limping slightly, as she unstrapped her prosthetic leg. She leaned on the counter, balancing awkwardly, but she didn't hide it. She walked, one step at a time, unashamed of the empty space below her knee. Ryan's chest twisted. He thought of his own prosthetic, shoved in the corner of his room, hidden like a secret he couldn't bear to face. She wore her loss in the open, while he buried his. He hated how much courage it took to do what she made look simple. For the first time, he wondered if he was the one who had been hiding, not her. Max padded across the floor, his titanium limb tapping softly against the wood. He leapt onto the couch, water still clinging to his fur, and nudged Ryan's arm. Ryan stiffened, biting the inside of his cheek, fighting the pull of a smile. Max wagged harder, tilting his head, his eyes bright. A small sound escaped Ryan's throat, half laugh, half gasp. He tried to cover his mouth, but it was too late. The laughter broke free, shaky, but real. It startled him. He hadn't laughed since his mum's funeral. The sound felt foreign, like it didn't belong to him anymore. He looked down at Max, wagging his tail proudly, running in circles, even with the shining piece of metal for a leg. Ryan's lips curved, despite himself. Sarah looked over from the kitchen, watching silently. She didn't say a word, but her eyes softened, as if she knew what that laugh meant. For the first time in months, Ryan felt the weight in his chest shift, just slightly. Watching Sarah move without shame and Max run without care, he saw strength in brokenness. And against his will, a flicker of light cracked through the darkness he had wrapped around himself. Ryan sat on the couch, the blanket Sarah had given him draped loosely across his lap. His hands twisted at the edges, restless, like he was holding something too heavy to carry inside. Finally, his voice broke through the silence. He said the accident had killed his mother, but left him alive, and that every day since, he had wondered why it was not the other way around. His eyes blurred with tears as he whispered that maybe, if he had not begged her to drive him that night, she would still be here. Sarah sat across from him, her eyes soft but her posture firm. She told him it was not his fault, that grief always lied, and made survivors believe they caused it. Ryan shook his head, refusing to hear it. He said he should have been the one to die, because his mum was strong and kind, and the world needed her. His voice cracked as he repeated that he was just broken and in the way. Sarah leaned forward, her tone sharper now. She told him she had her own story, that a drunk driver had smashed into her car, leaving her waking up to find half her body gone. She said the man she was supposed to marry walked away days after the surgery, telling her he could not imagine a future with a woman who could not run anymore. Ryan's head lifted, eyes wide. The room went still as Sarah admitted she had wanted to die too, but she did not. She chose to live because the alternative was letting someone else decide her worth. Ryan stared at her, torn between anger and awe. He muttered that she was stronger than him, that she could face the world, while he could not. Sarah shook her head and told him strength was not something people were born with. It was something they chose, every time they refused to give up. She pointed at the corner where his unused prosthetic rested against the wall, telling him that his mum had not raised him to hide from life. Ryan's breath hitched, his face flushed with rage. He shouted that she did not understand, that wearing that leg made him feel like a monster, like everyone was staring at what he had lost. Sarah's eyes did not soften. She told him flatly that his mother did not carry him for 9 months, did not love him for 14 years, only for him to throw it all away in self-pity. She said his mum had not raised a coward. The words struck like a knife. Ryan's chest heaved, and a scream ripped from his throat. He yelled at her to stop, that she was not his mother, that she had no right to say that. His fists pounded against the arm of the couch, his body shaking with grief. Tears poured down his face as he sobbed that he missed his mum, that he hated himself for being alive when she was gone. Sarah moved closer, but did not touch him, letting him cry, letting the storm break open. For a long time, the apartment was filled only with his sobs and the soft sound of Max pacing near his chair. When the crying slowed, Ryan looked up, exhausted, his voice hoarse. He asked Sarah why she still fought, why she had not given up when she had lost so much. Sarah answered quietly that giving up would have meant the drunk driver won, the fiancé won, the pain won. She said she refused to let her life be defined by people who had already left. Ryan closed his eyes, chest still trembling, but something in her words pierced the fog. He did not agree yet, did not believe yet, but a seed had been planted. Sarah leaned back, her face unreadable but her voice steady. She told him the world would not wait for him to be ready, and if he wanted to honor his mother, the first step was to stand up and try. Ryan woke up to the sound of Sarah sliding a newspaper onto the table. Her face was tense, like she already knew what it would do to him. He rubbed his eyes, reached for it, and froze when the headline screamed back at him. Billionaire's crippled son spirals out of control. His father's name, Edward Whitmore, was printed in bold right beneath it, with a quote about how Edward was struggling to manage his troubled boy. Ryan's stomach dropped. His hands trembled as he read on. The article said he had stormed out because of drugs, that he was reckless, spoiled, and dangerous. It painted him as a stain on the family name, a broken heir spiraling into shame. Vanessa's fingerprints were all over the words. She had gone to the tabloids, feeding them poison, and dragged Edward's name into it to make it look legitimate. His chest tightened, rage boiling inside him. He slammed the paper down, then snatched it back up and crumpled it in his fists. His voice cracked as he shouted that the whole city now thought he was trash. He tore the paper in half, his breath ragged, then slammed his fist against the table so hard it rattled. He screamed that maybe Vanessa was right. Maybe he really was nothing but a broken burden. Sarah flinched at the sound but didn't look away. She leaned closer, her voice sharp and steady. "This is what she wants," she told him. "She wants you to believe the lies, so you'll never stand again." Ryan shook his head violently, tears spilling down his face. He shouted that no one cared about the truth, that people only cared about headlines, and that even his dad would probably believe what he read. His chest heaved, his face red with fury and despair. He whispered that maybe it would be easier to just disappear, to let everyone forget him. Sarah's voice cut in before the words could sink deeper. She told him the world only owned him if he let it. He had a choice, to let their lies bury him or to rise up and make them choke on the truth. Ryan's fists still clenched around the shredded paper. His eyes burned, his throat raw, but Sarah's words stuck. Max pawed at his lap, the small titanium leg glinting under the light, reminding him that broken didn't mean finished. Ryan closed his eyes, his voice hoarse, admitting that he was scared. Sarah answered quietly that fear was normal, but surrender would only prove Vanessa right. The boy sat in silence, his hands trembling, the pieces of the ruined newspaper scattered across the table. The lies had cut him to pieces, but for the first time he felt the fire push back. He wasn't ready to believe yet, but somewhere inside he knew Sarah was right. Sarah pushed Ryan's chair through the glass doors of the rehab center. The smell of sweat and disinfectant filled the air, mixed with the sound of clanking weights and steady grunts. Ryan's eyes darted around the room. Men and women with scars and missing limbs pushed their bodies against pain, sweat pouring but determination burning brighter. He whispered that they had lost more than him, yet they were still fighting. Sarah leaned closer, her voice soft but firm. "This is why I brought you here," she said. Ryan swallowed hard, his stomach twisting with shame. A man in a wheelchair rolled over, sleeves cut short to reveal empty space where arms used to be. He grinned at Ryan, voice calm but powerful. "Legs don't define the fight, kid. Heart does." Ryan stared at the floor, his fists curling tight. Sarah guided him to the therapy bars, where a prosthetic leg waited. His chest tightened, panic clawing inside him. He shook his head, saying he couldn't, that he wasn't ready. Sarah's tone snapped sharp, cutting through his fear. "Your mom didn't raise a quitter. You've been hiding long enough." His throat burned as he shouted back that he couldn't do it. Sarah's face hardened, her voice rising with fire. "Yes, you can. Stand for the boy your mother loved." The room grew quiet, veterans pausing to watch. Ryan's breath came fast and shallow as Sarah strapped the prosthetic to his leg. She lowered her voice, steady but unyielding. "I believe in you, even if you don't yet." Ryan gripped the parallel bars, sweat already slicking his palms. He tried to pull himself up, arms shaking, but his body fought him. His legs buckled, and he crashed sideways onto the mat with a sickening thud. Pain shot through his hip, humiliation tearing at his chest. He cried out, covering his face, whispering that he was a joke, that everyone was staring. Sarah knelt beside him, her voice fierce. "Get up, Ryan. Don't let this be the end." He shook his head, tears blinding him. She grabbed his shoulder, her tone like steel. "Get up. Stop letting fear bury you." For a moment, silence held him down. Then, trembling, Ryan planted his palms on the mat and pushed. His arms quivered, his breath ragged, but slowly he rose again, gripping the bars with white knuckles. His legs wobbled violently, sweat streaming down his face. But this time, he stayed upright. For 3 seconds, 5, his jaw clenched as he whispered that it hurt. Sarah's voice cracked with pride as she told him that pain meant he was alive, that he was standing. Ryan's chest heaved, his eyes wet, but he did not let go. Around him, veterans nodded, some clapping softly, knowing what it meant to fight gravity itself. And in that fragile moment, Ryan was no longer just a broken boy in a chair. He was a survivor, trembling but standing, for the first time since the night that took his mother away. Edward appeared at the rehab center 2 days later, his expensive shoes clicking against the tile as he searched for his son. His eyes landed on Ryan, gripping the bars with trembling arms, sweat dripping down his face. Edward's voice cracked as he said, "It was time to go home." Ryan shook his head, his jaw set. He told his father that the mansion was not a home, it was a prison with chandeliers. Edward froze, guilt tightening his chest. He stepped closer, reaching for his son, but Ryan's glare stopped him cold. Ryan's voice trembled as he said that after the accident he needed a father, but all Edward gave him was silence. He said his father chose work, chose Vanessa, chose anything but him. Edward's hands dropped to his sides, shame written across his face. Before he could answer, Vanessa walked in, heels sharp on the floor, her voice dripping with venom. She called Sarah a broken woman, teaching a broken boy, mocking the sight of Ryan with a prosthetic. She sneered that it was pathetic to think losers could fix each other. The room grew heavy, and even the veterans nearby turned to listen. Sarah's eyes flashed. She stepped forward, her voice steady but sharp as a blade. She told Vanessa that being broken was not shameful, but cruelty was. She said Ryan had survived the unthinkable and was stronger than Vanessa ever would be. Sarah's words cut the air, and for the first time Edward looked at Vanessa not with love, but with clarity. Vanessa's face twisted, anger burning, but she pressed on. She said Edward should drag his son home before he embarrassed the family further. Ryan snapped that he was not the embarrassment, that the real shame was a father too blind to see the truth, and a stepmother who thrived on lies. His voice echoed, raw and pained. Edward's breath shook as he looked from his son to his wife. Sarah placed a hand on Ryan's chair and spoke calmly. She told Edward that Ryan didn't need pity, he needed belief. She told him he had a choice, to keep protecting Vanessa's mask or to finally stand with his son. Edward's chest rose and fell as the silence pressed on him. Then slowly he turned to Vanessa. His voice was low but sharp when he told her he was done ignoring the truth. Vanessa tried to protest, but Edward's eyes no longer wavered. He said he had lost his wife once and would not lose his son again. For the first time, Ryan saw his father's face break, the coldness gone, replaced with regret. Tears filled his eyes as Edward whispered that he was sorry. Ryan's lips trembled, torn between anger and the longing to believe it. And in that moment, the mask Vanessa wore for years began to shatter. All eyes in the rehab center were on Ryan as Sarah steadied him by the parallel bars. His hands clutched the metal, his body trembling under the weight of fear and the prosthetic strapped to his leg. He took a shaky breath, lifted his chin, and pushed upward. The room held its breath as his body wavered but slowly rose. His knees shook violently, sweat rolling down his temples, but he was standing. Edward's hand covered his mouth, tears already forming as he whispered his son's name. Ryan's chest heaved, his face twisted with effort, but determination flared in his eyes. He shifted 1 foot forward, the prosthetic dragging, the sound rough against the floor. Then his balance gave out, and he toppled sideways. Gasps filled the room, but before anyone could reach him, Ryan pushed his palms against the mat and pulled himself back up. The effort ripped through his muscles, but he locked his jaw, refusing to surrender. His arms trembled as he gripped the bars again, dragging his body upright until he stood once more. His breath came in sharp bursts, but this time he stayed up longer, his face lit with both pain and pride. Edward's tears broke free, running down his cheeks as he said his son was stronger than he ever was. Ryan turned his head, sweat and tears mingling on his face. His voice cracked but was clear. He said he wasn't stronger, he had only stopped being afraid. The room fell silent again, the weight of his words sinking deep. And in that moment, surrounded by Sarah, his father, and strangers who now looked at him with awe, Ryan's broken body stood taller than it ever had before. Edward filed for divorce from Vanessa within weeks, his voice firm when he told her that lies and cruelty no longer had a place in his home. For the first time since the accident, he chose his son over his image. He left the glass towers of business behind at night and sat by Ryan's side during training, clapping at every small victory. The cold man Ryan once knew began to fade, replaced by a father who finally showed up. Ryan trained harder, sweat soaking his shirt, his arms aching, but his smile grew wider each day. The boy who once hid from the world now stood taller on his prosthetic leg, showing others that broken did not mean defeated. Word spread, and soon other teens with wheelchairs, crutches, and scars began reaching out to him. They saw in Ryan what they could not see in themselves, proof that hope was still alive. Sarah stood beside him through it all, her quiet strength a constant anchor. Together, they launched a small community program called Walk Again Project. Max became the heart of it, trotting with his titanium leg, tail wagging, a living reminder that life could still be joyful. Families gathered on weekends, veterans volunteered, and kids who once gave up learned to stand again, cheered on by a boy who had once lost all belief. Edward donated resources, but it was Ryan who carried the vision. He spoke to kids not as a perfect hero, but as someone who knew what despair felt like. He told them their scars did not erase their worth. Each word carried the weight of his own pain and the light of his survival. The boy who once whispered that he was trash now lifted others from that same darkness. One evening, Ryan stood on a small stage at a community center, lights shining against his prosthetic leg. Sarah stood beside him, Max at her feet, both watching with quiet pride. Ryan looked out at the crowd of kids, parents, and veterans and took a deep breath. His voice was calm, his tone real. He told them losing a leg did not mean losing life. Sometimes the broken pieces were the ones that built the strongest people. The room fell silent, not with pity, but with respect. Edward sat in the front row, his hands clasped, tears glistening as he watched his son. Sarah's eyes shone. Max's tail tapped against the floor. Ryan smiled, no longer hiding, no longer afraid. His words carried out into the world, leaving behind not just a story of loss, but a promise of resilience and hope. From a boy abandoned in the storm to the moment he stood tall on a prosthetic leg, Ryan's journey was never just about walking again. It was about finding courage through pain, love through loss, and a father who finally chose his son. This story reminds us that compassion heals deeper than wealth, and that brokenness can become strength when shared. If this story touched you, leave a comment, share your feelings, and pass it on. Subscribe, like, and share emotional echoes so more hearts can be reached. Thanks for listening.